Welcome to the Digital Velocity Podcast, a podcast covering the intersection between strategy, digital marketing, and emerging trends impacting each of us. In each episode, we interview industry veterans to dive into the best, hard-hitting analysis of industry news and critical topics facing brand executives. Now, your hosts, Erik Martinez.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Digital Velocity Podcast. I'm Erik Martinez, and today I'd like to introduce you to Kathleen Perley, who's the founder of DemystifAI and currently a staff professor at Rice University's Business School, teaching young minds how to leverage AI. Kathleen, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Erik, so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I have been waiting for this conversation for a long time. And for those of you listening, Kathleen and I have spent some time in some peer groups together. And so we've gotten to know each other, and she is a brilliant mind in the world of AI. So I think you're going to enjoy learning from her today. So
yeah, this may be a more structured nerd out than our normal ones, though.
Let's try not to get too technical, okay? You have sent some stuff over my head from time to time. So we got to bring it back down to where I can understand it, and I think most people will be able to understand it. Hey, Kathleen, why don't you just give us a real brief description of your journey to this point in time?
Yeah, happy to. My background and my degree is in linguistics. And back in 2010, when I graduated with a degree in linguistics and Spanish, much to my parents' dismay, they wasn't sure what I was going to do with that type of degree, as there was not much you could do. So ended up working in doing some research overseas. So I did a Fulbright in Madrid on phonetics and second language acquisition. Came home, and I grew up with a wonderful, amazing mom who was a true New Yorker through and through. And so when I had about 8 months between my program ending and my PhD program starting, my mom said, if you're going to live in this house, you have to have a job. I don't care what job. And so I didn't have to pay rent, but I had to have some type of job to live at the house, and found a friend who introduced me to an internet automotive digital marketing startup. And I was their first hire. I was there for a little over 2 years. Yeah. I remember I got that job, and we were talking about kind of the complexities of the job, what my roles and responsibilities were. And they were like, what are your thoughts? And I was like, really don't know what I'm doing. And they were like, that's fine. We're not paying you much. And I was like, cool. And if it doesn't work out, I'll be gone in 8 months. So there's no pressure on that end about having to worry about firing me. But actually fell in love with it and was there for 2 years, ended up being VP of business development and R&D, launching new technology. I remember running the very first Facebook ad when it was coming out back in 2011, 12 timeframe.
Nice.
Yeah. And so after it was there for 2.5 years, that company grew to about 120 clients across the US, and decided that maybe I should do it on my own. What's the worst that could happen? And started Decode, which was a digital healthcare transformation company and advertising. And I grew it to about 70 employees and sold in 2023 to private equity, and rolled off in 24 after helping them with their AI implementation. And now working at Rice, teaching, advising the deans on AI implementation at the business school, as well as starting my new AI consulting business and helping leaders really figure out how to apply this in a way that makes sense for their business.
Yeah, that's a fantastic story. It's interesting how these technologies evolve, because I remember, and I'm about to date myself, but before the advent of the modern internet and being able to do modern day e-commerce, I remember building a company's first e-commerce enabled website.
Yeah.
We built our own little CMS and ability to load products and pricing. It was really super clunky, but the sales started coming in. And here we are 20 something years later, and that industry is relatively mature now, relatively speaking. And now we have this new exciting technology. I think there's a lot of misconceptions about AI, what it can and what it can't do. I think there's some fear about what the potential promise is. I think there's some over optimism, and we saw this back in the internet bubble where people were like, the internet's going to change the world. And it did, but it took a really long time to do it, right? I'm not sure that this cycle will take as long, because we're
Yeah.
starting to see some of the effects of AI, but I don't think it's going to be quite as fast as people think it is, and I don't think it's quite as scary. So let's start there. What's your perspective on today's AI and what we should see in the next couple of years?
I will say this might not be what everyone wants to hear, but if AI doesn't scare you a little bit and gives you some slight thoughts of building a bunker just in case, not that you're actually going to act on any of that stuff, then there is probably a little bit of a lack of true understanding of what it's capable of today. And I think it should be enough of a fear where you like maybe start thinking about it and then you're like, meh. So I think when it comes to the capabilities, I think there's a lot of people who focus on the fear side of it. And the truth of the matter is, it can be scary in terms of when you think about how it will shift how we do our work, how businesses function, where we add value, the expectations from consumers. That is all going to shift and change. But there's also a lot of really awesome benefits and really interesting ways in terms of how this can unlock a ton of discovery. Even when I think about AI as it pertains to, and I'm sure, Erik, you know this, right? I can't remember how many times during interview questions when I was talking to employees that we were looking to hire, and they would ask me, like, what's your work-life balance look like? And I would almost laugh in a way that you're like, oh, you think I'm a bootstrap company CEO and I have a work-life balance? That's funny. But I do think, to me, one of the values AI potentially has for our workforce is the ability to finally deliver on that idea or concept. I did my Fulbright in Madrid doing my research, and I oftentimes got in trouble for working late or doing anything that was perceived over and above what was asked of me. And one of my peers, who was a Madrileño, like from Madrid, told me, he goes, you Americans live to work. We work to live. And like my whole passion and identity and everything I've done has been so tied to my professional career, whereas their mentality is like, this is a means to an end to do what I actually love to do versus trying to combine the two. And so I think there's a lot of hope from that perspective of it achieving that. Now, in the last couple of weeks, there's been a lot of chatter on AGI and it being achieved internally at a lot of the frontier models. So artificial general intelligence. And there's been some studies. So if you think there's a benchmark called the AGI benchmark, and the new O3 model from OpenAI scored higher than what we would indicate. So typically for AGI, we would say it would be about, I think it's around like a 73, 75, and it scored like a 76. So it was within very close, but has surpassed what we'll call artificial general intelligence, which would mean this AI that's coming down the pipeline. Now, O3 is not publicly available, but this technology, which will likely become available in 2025, is smarter than 93% of the population. That ARC test I was talking about, they gave that to a bunch of PhD professors, probably many people in my building today, right? They score anywhere from roughly like 30 to 40 on the same exam. Now, they're being asked questions outside their discipline. So they're very smart people because they have PhDs, but it's not like they were only asked questions about their discipline. And so I think this is very smart. And this has been able to achieve this huge success when it comes to a lab perspective and in the internal frontier models and what they're doing. But the question is, do we know, do leaders know, do employees know how to leverage the power of AGI? And there are going to be change management, adoption, regulation. Does it exist? Probably. Yes, it does. That's what the consensus is. But there is going to be a delay because this is such a new technology, and at the rate at which it's expanding, you have time. Don't feel like you're behind. You have time to really get on board.
Yeah, I think that's a hugely important insight because it is rapidly changing just even in the 2+ or 3+ years. I can't even remember now when the announcement was made, but
Yeah.
right, a lot of things have changed and everybody's throwing AI into what they do. I think one of the areas of concern is what's real and what's not. I see a lot of applications where companies are throwing AI into their
Yeah.
technology. And we've seen some tests where data is, yeah, okay, yeah, I got a gain there, but given the costs, I have better investments to make. And I
Yeah.
think part of the issue, Kathleen, from my perspective, is that one of the most important things that people don't understand about AI is that it still needs context. It still needs good data to do it. And yes, even the smartest person in the world can assimilate data, but if that data is completely random or noisy, even the
Yeah.
smartest people in the world have a hard time processing
Yeah.
it. And
Yeah.
so, what's your advice to people to say, hey, you know what? First, there's some principles in how you guys start to adopt this technology in your organizations or in your daily lives. Because I think the consensus I see in the people I talk to is, hey, we use it for some writing and it's great and it helps me with my emails and I can do certain things a little bit faster. But I think those are like just the surface level things, right? What is your advice to people on one, how to start using this technology every day? And then two, how do they help narrow down the noise?
Yeah, I think, I see it all the time. It's actually funny, or not funny. I worked in the healthcare sector pretty heavily, and there was a company that was leveraging this idea of AI technology to analyze calls and some of the medical records and things of that nature. Turned out it was an offshore team in India that was AI that was analyzing after hours. So you do have to be careful. Don't be duped by the demo. Ask the right questions. Take a little bit of a critical eye when it comes to these things. But I think most importantly, AI is a tool. It should not fundamentally change the niche that you're providing a service to or your product. It may adjust some of the delivery things of that nature, but your objectives as a business, at least in the near term, aren't going to change dramatically. And when I teach a class at Rice where I go through AI strategy implementation and how to identify where to begin. I go, the first thing you do is start thinking about what are some of our challenges? What are some of the pain points? Where are there opportunity? If I had a magic wand or more time, I would do this. And then you think through all of those things and you say, okay, what data do I have? Do I have clean data? Does it make sense? What tool could I use? What are the costs of that tool? If we were to make this modification, what is the impacted potential value of it, short term and long term? Not only from a financial standpoint, but also from a team standpoint. Like, how many people are going to be impacted from a change management? How much fatigue do they have underway? Classifying them into what I'll call like these ideas of quick wins, really that perfect fit. And then that last one really being like a big bet and making sure that you're balancing out the quick wins, like helping analyze or summarize reports or help with research, to maybe a sweet spot where you're using AI to help handle inventory, using computer vision to help write alt image tags, because that takes some 20 hours of your team every month to do, to like complete moonshots where you might be thinking about how do we develop personalized a fashion brand. When you think about some of those brands where they pick out your outfits for you, how do I build something like that then can work on a personalized, customized basis with each of my customers? That would be probably more of a big bet, right? So finding, I would hate to say this, but like brain dumping everything out, but thinking about it from an operational standpoint and from a business perspective. Don't start with, here's the shiny new object in the AI world. Let me see if I can find a use case for it. Go the other way. Hey, I have to get this done today, or I'm working on this. I'm going to try an AI tool and let me see if it works and how good of a job it does. And does it add value? That's really, I think, the best way to identify that. And I see it happen time and time again where companies get so distracted by the shiny objects that they forget the low-hanging fruit. And I know some of these things like helping with email drafting might seem trivial, but when it comes to employee onboarding and using AI, like a chatbot that allows employees to ask questions about the policies of your company, in terms of HR, those 5 minutes saved from HR's time here, 2 minutes here, 3 minutes there, this person 30 minutes here, that adds up over time. And I think part of people, when they see these quick wins, they're dismissive of it because they're expecting this like seismic shift to occur. Not only is that unlikely, and you don't want to take that big of a bet out the gate, but furthermore, your team and your clients are not ready for it. So you need that quick win to build rapport and trust with your employees so they keep moving.
I recently did a talk with a group of industry professionals just trying to introduce the concept of AI. I think you're dead on the quick wins, and I gave them some examples. We have a client that we have been advising to put some of their apparel on model.
Mm-hmm.
We know that people just want to visualize
Yeah.
somebody in the clothing. And so I found a tool. It wasn't perfect, but I found a tool that allowed me to generate a model and put them in the clothing. Now, it did a couple of weird things. And so you had to kind
Yeah.
of pick and choose, but it was incredible. It was incredible in that, hey, I didn't have to go do a photo shoot. I
Yeah.
could, for this client, generate some on model photography to show their products in use. And it took me only a matter of minutes to
Yeah.
do that. And I'm nowhere near the expert on that, right? Somebody with a little more skill would be able to refine that and make it better. Another example, I was actually just updating my headshots.
Yeah.
And there's a site, I think it's, I don't remember the name now. I'll have to put it in the show notes, but I generated for $80 200 and some odd headshots that I narrowed down to about 5
Yeah.
that looked really good. Like I felt comfortable putting that out into the world. And if you actually go up on my LinkedIn right now, one of them is
Huh.
an AI generated headshot.
That's amazing. And you made a good point there, and I want to call it out to people listening, right? How many images were generated?
Well over 200.
That is really where the opportunity of AI lies, is in the scale of what it can deliver in terms of iterations for you then to review. I think some people who use AI and say, oh, this stinks or it doesn't work, I think there's a couple things going on. One, they're bringing the wrong tool to the job and they don't know how to use it. So they're bringing a sledgehammer to hang a photo on the wall. Or the other part is they're not capitalizing on the fact that most of these models are large language models. So all they're doing is predicting the next word. So it improves by thinking, if you will, out loud or by writing all these iterations. They don't push it to give iterations. They don't challenge it to get it refined. And that's where the value is not necessarily in terms of taking 100% of everything off your plate. At this point, at least, it's more about giving you the scale of options to evaluate and identify things that would normally take you. If a photographer had to do 250 photos and edit them, it would take tons of time.
And costs a lot. I know I've done professional headshots before, and you get one image back and you spend $300 or $400 to get that shot done.
Yeah.
And it takes the time to drive there, the time to sit with the photographer, do the shoot, do all the poses, pick out your clothing to do it. And this was cool because it put me in a suit and it put me in some casual stuff. And you had the ability to choose the different types of backgrounds, interior, exterior. It was really fascinating. Look, Kathleen, I know today we're on a tight time frame, but if you're a director of e-commerce or a VP of e-commerce today for a direct to consumer retail brand,
Yep.
and you had to say, hey, there's one thing that you should start doing today. Look, I've been in those shoes and I know there's hundreds of things that we actually need to do. But if there's one thing that is a quick win that in your experience that people could actually just sink their teeth into today that would help make that incremental improvement, what would it be?
I would say, and this kind of goes back to the idea of the scale at which AI provides value in, is personalization. I've been in that field. We've done tons of personalization strategies, and they're expensive. And we would only have 4 audiences because that's all the client could afford in terms of a personalization strategy. I mean, with AI, you have the personas. Start thinking about their customer journey. Start thinking about the communications. The AI is really great at creating volume. And you have the ability now, in a significantly less expensive manner, to start delivering on the value and the promise of personalization. And we've been trying to do it for years, but it's been so tough.
So let's start with that example and let's say, what is the first step? Let's say I know nothing about AI, but now you've got me intrigued. Yes, I've been trying to solve that problem my entire career. And yes, you're right. All the tools that exist out there are incredibly expensive and deliver marginal value.
Yeah.
So, what is step one?
I think the first step is, and I had an experience like this, where you think you know your customers and their behaviors and their personas, but do you really? So I had one client I was working with, they raised money to help pay for fallen firefighters' funerals and their children's education and things of that nature. And we talked to them about who their audience was. And they said hunters and fishers, conservatives, that they sometimes would help supply life-saving equipment, bulletproof vests, tanks and stuff. And they're like, that's what they care about. We then went and did kind of analysis of using data analytics on their site and who was actually donating online. And we identified that the primary donors online were female. They cared about their community. They wanted this sense of protection for their community, but also understood that there was a sacrifice, that a loss of a firefighter or police officer has not only the immediate family, but also that community as a whole. And they were the bigger donators online. So we shared those data analytic points back with them, and they actually modified their ads. Prior were like men in front of tanks with bulletproof vests. And afterwards, with this data insight, what we found was the video that we shot from a fundraising standpoint focused on the little boy playing with a fire truck. You see the dad leave, and then it cuts back to at night, and you can see him playing on the windowsill, looking out, waiting for his father to come home, tying it into that emotional piece. And it was a huge success. And so I think step one is using your own data to really understand, do we know who our customer segments are? Are there any that we've been, due to a pressure of time or budget, have been just lumping together that really should be separate? And what are the key things that drive their decision making? That would be step one, doing some data analysis on the data that you're sitting on. I would utilize ChatGPT, does a good job. Julius AI, if you're doing really intense R-square modeling and prediction analysis, is really performant. It's actually a wrapper on some of these other models, but it's really good. I think it's $40 a month. And you can use it for 1 month. And if there's no other value, then you don't have to, but they do a really good job in terms of accuracy. And then use that data to then build new personas that make sense. And then you can then use those to create what I'll call synthetic focus groups. And for synthetic focus groups, I use Silly Tavern AI, which I'm now giving away my huge nerdness because it's for Dungeons and Dragons role playing.
I love it.
But I love it for this use case of synthetic focus groups. Or Microsoft just pushed out not too long ago, still in beta. It's called Tiny Troop, which is really cool. So then you can start engaging with them, right? So you can like, hey, I'm thinking about these different things in terms of messaging or new features in terms of policies on returning or accessibility on the site. How are my different audiences going to respond? How will they feel and think about this? It's a great way to do an inexpensive focus group. I've done it multiple times and I still have it in place. It's just really about going back to the basics, looking at your data, because if you don't have the right insight to drive all of the AI that you're moving forward after that, it's pointless. So if you don't have the right audiences and you try to do personalization strategy, then you're up creek without a paddle. But I think that is really the piece of advice I would give, is take out all assumptions that you have to a certain extent, look at the data, have it tell you the story that it's supposed to tell you, and then identify those segments. And then experiment. It's not perfect. And one thing I found, which is crazy, and this maybe might be my final tip for everyone, is I've noticed that if I prompt AI to, let's say, develop an email for a certain persona, I'll get a decent output if I give them enough context and background to be successful and I'm using the right model. But if I tell the model that gave them the same exact prompt, I simply just add, my job depends on this. I don't know, as a good Irish Catholic girl, like the Catholic guilt, I'm like keeping it onto my AI. You need to take it off my shoulders onto theirs. But I see significant improvement when I say my job depends on this in terms of the output. And so don't be afraid to do that or say, this seems like a lazy answer, or can you try again? And
I think for a lot of us, that just seems weird, right? We're talking to the computer in a way that we would talk to potentially somebody else. But many of us might have a taboo about having that conversation, even with somebody who needs that conversation. I find that very fascinating. Kathleen, we're just about out of time. I guess, uh, one, I would love to have you come back because I think we could give millions and millions of examples. And one of our missions right now at Digital Velocity is really to help people understand these tools and how to start the process of utilizing them. So this was super, super helpful. So hopefully you'll agree to come back at some point. But in the meantime, if somebody wanted to reach out to you, what's the best way?
I would say on Demystify, so rather than the Y at the end, it's AI because I love a good pun. So DemystifAI.com is our website. We have a newsletter. You can also find me on LinkedIn, Kathleen Perley. But yeah, I would love to hear what people have to say or nerd out a bit more on this.
Awesome. Kathleen, thank you so much for taking a bit of your time today to help our audience just learn a little bit more about this technology and how they could go about using it. That's it for today's episode of the Digital Velocity Podcast. I'm Erik Martinez, and have a great day, folks.
Thank you for listening. If you have enjoyed our show today, please tell a friend, leave us a review, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. Visit the digitalvelocitypodcast.com website to send us your questions and topic suggestions. Be sure to join us again on the Digital Velocity Podcast.